This morning comes from the book of Luke, chapter 1. In those days, Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in the hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leaped in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and exclaimed with a loud voice, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord."
Where's Tommy?
I thought he was with you.
No.
Jack.
Tommy?
Go get him.
Don't stop. Keep playing. Here we go. Here's the fun part.
Did you do this?
Great job.
Encouragement. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Little encouragement goes a long way, doesn't it? They say that a single word of encouragement does more good, oftentimes, in the midst of a single word in the midst of someone's failure than an hour of praise given after someone's success. I can think of an even more powerful time for encouragement. I think specifically about times that we've all experienced where we are really struggling with going one direction or another, and it's completely unclear. We've got a lot of anxiety about that. Maybe there's a lot at stake, and someone who knows us, who cares about us, offers an encouraging word that suddenly provides a moment of clarity, and we see which direction to go. Sometimes those words of encouragement can change the course of a person's entire life. Well, this morning, we'll find that in Elizabeth's words of encouragement to Mary, it not only changes her whole life, but through her life, actually, the course of world history. Now, but it's interesting in Luke's gospel, we've been looking at both Luke's and Matthew's gospel every Sunday, kind of looking at them in their own integrity, not trying to mishmash them together, just kind of read what each is presenting and follow the contours of the story as they tell it. In Luke's gospel, he starts his gospel not with a story of Joseph and Mary, but rather with Elizabeth and Zechariah. Now, everybody remembers exactly who Elizabeth and Zechariah are, right? For those, I see some heads nodding. Good. Get a gold star for the day for sure. But if you're not familiar with that story, let me just kind of refresh your memory a little bit. And if you could maybe adjust my sound, thank you. So Elizabeth is relative of Mary. Mary has come to her as she's just kind of heard the words that she's pregnant. She's kind of probably not wanting her town folk to know she's pregnant, so she's coming for a little extended visit. But Elizabeth is married to a priest named Zechariah. They're both very old. And as Luke's gospel begins, Zechariah has been selected for what probably would have been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, which is to go into the temple of Yahweh and go behind the curtain that blocks the Holy of Holies, the holiest place not only in Israel, but in their understanding, the holiest place in the world, where God was thought to be invisibly enthroned above the Ark of the Covenant. he was able to, a place that you're not able to approach without extensive ritual cleansings and prayers and so forth, because it was thought to be a little dangerous in there. If you weren't holy enough, that was it for you. So they kind of rotated this around. Not everybody wants to take that risk on a regular basis. He was selected. He gets to go behind the Holy of Holies. What he would have done there is attend to the altar. On the altar, there would have been two things. One is they call showbread, or the bread of the presence, and the other is incense, which would have been frankincense. If you came in here this morning, you smelled a little something in the air, that's frankincense. Frankincense is that smell of joy, of right relationship with God in the Israelite understanding. In fact, it was such a joyful, beautiful smell that you were not, the Bible forbade you to offer that as a sin offering. So it's about the happy times between us and God, right relationship. He was to change out the incense. So he's in there doing these things, and suddenly, according to the story, the archangel Gabriel appears to him and says, "Zechariah, it's your lucky day. Your prayers have been answered." What had he been praying? Well, we know through the angel what he's been praying. He says, Elizabeth will bear a child. Now, this is a little bit strange because Elizabeth has been barren throughout their whole marriage, and they're both very, very old. So Zechariah, although he's apparently been praying about this, attempts to mansplain to the angel why that's not possible. And in response, the archangel Gabriel says, well, listen, this time next year she'll have a son, and you're to call his name John, and I don't want to hear another word out of you because you questioned this. And so he's made mute and apparently deaf as well until John is born. Now that seems a little bit harsh, but consider the parallels. It would be kind of like inviting your friend to worship this Sunday. You look around and you see all this beautiful Christmas stuff. You hand the card saying, hey, next Sunday we're doing Christmas Eve worship, and your friend says, are you sure it isn't Easter next Sunday? Like, what? This is the danger of going to church only twice a year. You might mix them up. It's like, now, to put us back in that story, imagine that it's the archangel Gabriel saying, hey, you want to come to Christmas worship next Sunday, and saying, isn't it Easter? No, it's Easter. So Zechariah gets shut up. That's probably a lot of worse things that could happen to him. But then the archangel says that you shall name this child John. John in Hebrew means Yahweh is gracious. God is gracious. Not such a gracious thing he did, maybe, but again, considering the alternatives. So the last thing he's heard for 9 months is God is gracious. And it's not until, and as he looks around at his town, at his people, and so forth, the last thing he's heard is God is gracious, God is gracious, God is gracious. And then the baby's born. They write on a board for him, what shall we name this child? And he says, John. And his lips are open, according to the story. So we join Mary and Elizabeth 6 months into Elizabeth's pregnancy. So it's before the birth of John, that is John the Baptist. And as soon as Elizabeth sees Mary, apparently she's a little bit quicker read than Zechariah. All she needs to see is the equivalent of a little Christmas tinsel, and she knows it's Christmas time. The baby leaps in her womb, according to the story. John just kicks it, and this is the God is gracious baby. This is the miracle baby, and it just triggers an intuition in her immediately, saying, "You are the most blessed of women. You've got this amazing child you're bearing." Not a whole lot of information to go on, but she picks it up and gives her that encouragement, which then changes Mary's whole demeanor about the situation. This woman who's under stress, probably worried that her villagers will kill her if they know that she's pregnant, out of wedlock, and now she bursts out with its exuberant, joyous Magnificat, we know it as, which we'll hear shortly. But have you ever experienced that yourself? Those times in your life where you've been in a difficult situation and somebody makes all the difference for you, helps you discern which path to take. A lot of us, if you look at some of the major turnings we made in our lives, you can always find somebody who's been there who has offered a word or two of encouragement to you that's helped clarify that situation. I remember, for instance, myself, when I was struggling with the idea of going into ministry mightily for a couple of years in college, I went off to France to study for a semester, and as I landed in London, having never been to Europe at all, and I really wanted to visit Piccadilly Circus, to see the circus there. No circus in Piccadilly Circus, I discovered, but there were a bunch of restaurants, and I was hungry, and I was a poor, starving student already, even though I'd just begun my tour there, and so I noticed that the menus were on the outside of the restaurant, which in 1985 was not common in the U.S. So I was like, I could figure out which one I could afford. So I can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. Oh, pizza! I could afford that, and I'm a little bit nervous, though. This is actually the very pizza restaurant I found. I was nervous because I'd heard that all Europeans basically hate Americans. So I was nervous to open the doors and just go inside. I didn't know what I might encounter. But I grabbed the handle and I opened it up and I stepped it gingerly inside, and clear from across the restaurant, a waiter sees me. He calls out to me and says, "Sir, are you an American?" I'm like, what? I mean, I didn't have like a neon sign on me advertising American, but he'd seen me looking at the menu, and I had a knapsack on, and that was a clue because at that time, no man in Europe wore knapsacks. They wore those man purses. And so he knew American, and so I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. Is he going to spit on me or what? But he's signaling to me to come down. So I come up to him, and he says, "The gentleman over here would like to buy your dinner." I'm like, what? Turns out, yes, I sat down at the table. The guy was from New Zealand, and he'd been traveling around the south of France and was staying in a little pension. And when he was out touring one day, somebody broke in and stole everything from him, including his passport, his extra money, and all that. And an American family, having heard of this, and that they were staying in the same place, they helped him out. They gave him some money, saying, if you can pay us back, whatever, here's our address. And they took him around, helping him get his passport done, all that. He was so grateful for their graciousness, their generosity. He wanted to be generous to another American. Didn't matter who. So we had this lovely dinner, and we sit down for conversation. He finds out that I'm a student en route to France. He says, "Oh, what do you want to do with that economics degree you're working on?" And I'm like, "Well, probably go into business." But I'm struggling. I got this weird sense of ministry too. And he said, "Oh, really? Tell me more about that." And I'm telling him about how ministry does not make any sense to me at all. I thought all ministers were crazy or sadomasochists, and I was also partly right about that. And I'd never thought about being a minister until a couple of years ago, and I was on the run. I enrolled in a secular college, majored in economics, to try to steer myself as far away from ministry as I can get. And all this stuff, we finish up the dinner, and he says, "You know what? I know you are going into the ministry." I'm like, "What do you mean I'm going to the ministry? I've just told you all the reasons why I'm not going to the ministry, why I can't go into the ministry, why it's the last thing I want to do." He says, "No, I know you're going. In fact, the only thing I'm going to ask is in return for this meal is that you send me an invitation to your ordination." And as soon as he said that, it's like an electric thunderbolt went through me. And I lit up inside and didn't know what to make of these feelings. And I just said, "Yeah, that'll never happen." Of course, he eventually did get that invitation into the ministry. But that really was responsible for kind of turning me in such a way that literally it was not a month, it was just a month later, when I'm in France, I finally admitted to God. I couldn't admit that I'd be a minister, but I at least admitted that I couldn't see living life without going to seminary. It was kind of all downhill from there. But that single word of encouragement made all the difference to me in my path, from this perfect stranger who just simply wanted to be generous to another American. This morning I invite you simply to consider who has been Elizabeth in your life, who has felt that baby kicking in response to something you have on display inside that you haven't quite seen, who's been responsible for helping turn you on your path. Let's just take a moment now and think about one of those people and offer God thanks for them. thank you, God. Amen.
Our story continues in Luke chapter 1. And Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. For God has looked with favor on the lowliest of God's servant. Surely from now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is God's name. God's mercy is for those who fear God from generation to generation. God has shown strength with God's arm. God has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. God has helped God's servant Israel in remembrance of God's mercy, according to the promise God made to our ancestors, to Abraham, and to God's descendants forever. And Mary remained with her about 3 months, and then returned to her home.
So if a single word of encouragement is powerful, oftentimes those words of discouragement, unfortunately, are more powerful in a person's path. I think about, for instance, the son of my dissertation advisor at Princeton. He was a fantastic classical guitarist who was playing to a sold-out crowd in New Orleans years ago. He played so well, put his heart completely into it, and then the whole crowd just rose to their feet in exuberant applause, except for one person in the balcony. It's always those people in the balcony, going like this. And you can guess all that was on that guitarist's mind after the concert. I mean, he actually went out searching the crowd through all these ignoring all these people who had just loved him, looking for that one person, and couldn't find him. Just devastated him after that incredible concert. They say that there's nothing like a dogma to cloud your decision-making ability, and oftentimes it's those people. Your dogma simply means whatever is the established consensus, whether it be in religion or science or what have you. The people who tend to move things forward are always those who stand outside of dogma. And they're saying, hey, you know, the accepted way of doing things is not exactly correct. And they're the ones oftentimes where it's the whole crowd doing this. And maybe there's one person who's doing this. And I can imagine what it'd be like, for instance, for a person like Johannes Kepler. Johannes, God is gracious. When he first proposed that the planets make an ellipsis around the sun, I mean, how radical that was. I mean, clear back to Plato, 2,000 years earlier, Plato had said the planets must make a perfect sphere. That's the perfect way the planets go. Even Copernicus, who had dared to say, you know what, we don't rotate, the sun does not revolve around us, but we revolve around the sun. That was even too radical an idea for Copernicus. And can you imagine all this from the scientific establishment? And yet you can imagine also that somehow he had the guts to push that proposal forward. Somebody was doing this before there was any established consensus. Somebody, was doing this for him. Or think about the Grimke sisters. Some of you saw that wonderful Center for Faith Studies presentation from the author of The Invention of Wings, and talking about the Grimke sisters who were born into America in the mid-1800s or early 1800s, and they were born in Charleston, South Carolina, to a family that owned 100 slaves, and their father was a judge, supported slavery and also supported the subservience of women. And yet they arose to be not only abolitionists, but women's suffragists in like 1830. Can you imagine being a woman to begin with, advocating for both these things? I mean, not even all the abolitionists were for women's suffrage. Not even all the women's suffragists were for abolition. And even if they were, a whole lot of them didn't want the two put together. They thought that was way too radical, and yet they spoke out boldly. Sometimes, frankly, it was only the two of them offering encouragement to each other that got them through the day. And yet they helped move our nation forward. And we come to Mary and Elizabeth. Elizabeth getting this intuition and giving Mary some encouragement, and electric thunderbolt just goes right through her, and she bursts out in this exuberant song to God, which we know as the Magnificat, really the first Christmas carol ever offered. Also, the longest words from a woman in the entire New Testament. Words that have literally, since the earliest days of Christianity, been prayed by someone every single day until now. At Christmas time, we kind of get this warm, glowy feeling about Mary's Magnificat, but if you read the words, some of those words would even make the likes of Karl Marx say, "Oh, that's radical." Right? I mean, did you hear them? I mean, here's some of them. God has shown strength with God's arm. God has scattered those with arrogant thoughts and proud inclinations. God has pulled the powerful down from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty-handed. This is what she sees as the significance of her child. This is a song of praise, quite frankly, pretty much that's restricted to those who are feeling empty-handed, feeling like they're on the bottom of things, who are not sitting on thrones. To the rest of us, it's a rather threatening song. But this is what Mary has welling up within her. And in these words, we know then that Mary is not only being encouraged by Elizabeth, but she's also finding encouragement from someone who lived 1,000 years before her. I'm thinking specifically of a woman named Hannah. You remember Hannah? Okay, first of all, Hannah, the name, means grace. It's the female equivalent of John. God is gracious. Hannah means grace. And Elizabeth, the one offering encouragement to Mary, she is gives birth to John the Baptist, who will prophesy the coming of the King of Kings. Hannah gives birth to Samuel, who prophesies about the very first king of Israel, Saul. So there's a lot of parallel stuff going on. Well, it goes further, though. Obviously, the inspiration for that whole Magnificat came from this woman named Hannah, who had been barren and given a child. And when she gives birth to the child, she has these words that I'm going to run them parallel to Mary, some excerpts from Hannah's song and from Mary's song. Hannah prays 1,000 years before Mary, "My heart exults in the Lord, my strength is exalted in the Lord, my mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in thy salvation." Mary prays, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior, for God has regarded the low estate of God's handmaiden." Hannah prays, "There is no one holy like the Lord." Mary prays, "Holy is God's name." Hannah prays, "Talk no more so very proudly, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by God actions will be weighed." Mary prays, "God has shown strength with God's arm," a symbol of God's judgment in the Scriptures. "God has scattered the proud, those with arrogant thoughts, and proud inclinations." Hannah prays, "The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird up their strength." Mary prays, "God has pulled the powerful down from their thrones and lifted up the lowly." Hannah prays, "Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger." Mary prays, "God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty-handed." Finally, Hannah prays, "God will guard the feet of his faithful ones." Mary prays, "God shows mercy to everyone from one generation to the next who honors God as God." Can you imagine being Hannah 1,000 years ago and being told, "You know what? You're going to provide encouragement for someone 1,000 years after you, who will be the mother of the King of Kings"? Or can you imagine Mary being told by someone in her day, "You know what? 2,000 years ago, there'll be this preacher preaching about you on Sunday morning at Countryside Church." I mean, really? 2,000 years later, people still finding encouragement from the words of this person. I'm thinking specifically of people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who fought mightily against the Nazis, was later jailed and executed. Bonhoeffer writes of Mary, "The Song of Mary is the oldest Advent hymn. It is at once the most passionate, the wildest, one might even say the most revolutionary Advent hymn, most revolutionary Advent hymn ever sung. This is not the gentle, tender, dreamy Mary whom we sometimes see in paintings. This song has none of the sweet, nostalgic, or even playful tones of some of our Christmas carols. It is instead a hard, strong, inexorable song about the power of God and the powerlessness of humankind. You think Bonhoeffer drew encouragement as he's sitting in jail from this woman for 2,000 years ago? Or I'm thinking also of the many people in the world's oppressed who have found drawn from Mary's Magnificat. You know that Mary's Magnificat has been banned by at least 2 governments in the world. We know that during the British occupation of India, they literally banned the Magnificat from being sung in churches because they were worried it would stir up the masses. When the women in Argentina were finding their sons and daughters disappeared by the military junta and protested at the Plaza del Mayo, the junta forbid the publication of the Magnificat. And they say also in Guatemala, although I've not been able to find a primary source that confirms this, it was also banned in Guatemala for the same reasons, worried that the people would rise up. Revolutionary stuff. Mary's words continuing to inspire people 2,000 years later makes me wonder who she's inspiring today in today's world. And perhaps who might be Mary for us? Who might we offer a word of encouragement who's feeling under someone's thumb? I can imagine for starters we could start with the people who represent every word on this list, which this week was banned from the CDC even using in any kind of publication. People behind these words. Who could use a little encouragement from the Elizabeths of our world? Could that Elizabeth be us who continue to be inspired by Mary's word? Who's Mary for you? Or who this year can be Mary for you?
A monastery had fallen on hard times. A once great monastic order had been reduced to 5 monks left in the decaying mother house. The abbot and 4 others, all over 70 in age, were all that were left. A Jewish rabbi used to come to a little hut in the woods surrounding the monastery. The abbot of the monastery visited the rabbi during one such visit and asked if he had advice which might save the monastery. The rabbi said,
"Oh, I know how it is. The spirit has gone out of the people. It is the same in my hometown. Almost no one comes to services of worship anymore."
And the rabbi and the abbot wept together, read sacred texts, and quietly spoke of deep things. When the abbot had to leave, he asked whether the rabbi had any advice which would help save the dying order.
"No, I'm sorry. I have no advice to give. The only thing I can tell you is that the Messiah is one of you."
With those words, the abbot left the rabbi and returned to his dying monastery. When the monks asked about the rabbi's words, the abbot passed on to them the words of the rabbi about the Messiah being one of us. The abbot admitted that he did not know what the words meant. As the days passed, the old monks pondered the rabbi's words and wondered.
Could he have meant one of us? If so, which one? Do you suppose he meant the abbot? Brother Thomas? Brother Eldred? Surely not. Eldred is hard to get along with. Although when you think about it, he's virtually always right. Surely not Philip. Philip is so passive, a real nobody. But almost mysteriously, he has the gift for somehow always being there when you need him. Of course, the rabbi could not have meant me. But supposing he did, suppose I am the Messiah.
As they contemplated this matter, the old monks began to treat each other with extraordinary respect, in the event that one of them, among them, might be the Messiah. And just in case one might be himself the Messiah, they each began to treat themselves with extraordinary respect. People who came to visit the beautiful forest in which the monastery was located began to sense this aura of extraordinary respect that now began to surround the 5 old monks. There was something strangely attractive, even compelling about it. They began to come back to the monastery more often to picnic, to play, to pray. They began to bring their friends to show them this special place. And their friends brought their friends. Then it appeared that some of the younger men who came to visit the monastery started to talk with the old monks. After a while, one of them asked if he could join them. And then another. And then another. So within a few years, the monastery had become once again a thriving order, and thanks to the rabbi's gift, a vibrant center of light and spirituality in the kingdom.
Has the light inside of you felt a bit dim over this Advent time? Either through some direct situation that's happening to you, or just when all the news of the day finally gets into you? Well then, can you hear these words as words of encouragement spoken directly to you? This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this as often as you eat of it in remembrance of me. This is my blood, which is shed for you. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me. You do not have to be a member of Countryside Community Church or subscribe to any particular doctrine or dogma to come forward. All that we ask is if your heart calls you forward, know that you are most welcome here. So likewise, if you would prefer to receive communion from your seat, simply raise your hand as an usher passes and you'll be served there. Or if you'd prefer simply to abstain altogether, know that that's okay too. Whichever way you've come to us this morning and are with us is what we honor. But if you do come forward, we invite you to take a piece of bread, dip it into the cup. And as you take this into yourself, know that while you may not be the Messiah dwells within you. The gifts of God for the people of God. I invite our ushers to prepare the table. And as they do, as they come forward, I invite you to remind ourselves of who we are and whose we are. Next slide, please. We are an inclusive, open, and affirming family of faith, welcoming all to God's table of love and acceptance. We are diverse, yet united by Christ's example. We care for one another, support one another, and challenge one another to become all that God creates us to be. We work together to nurture our community and to promote peace and justice in our conflicted world.